Well, we're going to continue our series on money's worth today. And because of it's Father's Day, I'm sure that you can relate to this. There's nothing quite like the birth of your first child changing your whole perspective of life. I mean, dads, you can relate to that, right? You moms too. I mean, before our first child, Diane and I, we just spent money on us. We went out to eat. We did what we wanted to. We went to the movies, and we were focused on our careers and on our marriage. And then Heather comes along, and everything changes. And, no longer are we spending everything on ourselves, but we're pouring our lives and love into her and making sure that her needs are met. And we no longer slept at night, but we made sure she slept and had clean diapers. And so our whole perspective of life changed when we became parents. And by the way, that little girl is teaching your 4-year-olds in Little Creek right now, so she's come a long way. But we can all relate to something happening in our lives that changed our perspective on life and how we view life. Maybe it was a birth of a child. Maybe it was marriage, totally changed your perspective. Maybe it was a tragedy that happened that totally changed how you saw everything. Maybe even a near tragedy where you almost lost your life, but it totally changed your perspective on life. Well, all of us have a perspective of our money, and in particular, the stuff that we buy with our money and the decisions that we make with our money. And, our assumptions sometimes about our money and our perspectives about our money sometimes are flawed. We get them from different places. Sometimes we get our assumptions from our parents, and we saw how they spent money, whether wisely or unwisely, and we learned from them. We get our assumptions from our own experience, things that we've done, mistakes even that we've made. And then there's culture. We get our assumptions from culture about our perspective on money. And, of course, culture wants you to do what with your money? Spend it, spend it, spend it, spend it, right? So sometimes our assumptions are flawed, and our assumptions drive our behavior. And if we have the wrong assumptions and the wrong perspective of our money, then we will, as we said last week, will become lost financially. And we said also that you cannot be a devoted follower of Christ and remain lost financially, because Jesus said so much about money, and money is a spiritual issue. And so we're going to continue talking about it today in Luke chapter 16. We're going to look at a parable that Jesus told, and as I said last week, over half of Jesus' parables dealt with money and the things that we do with our possessions. And so, here's what we're going to talk about today as we get into this parable. To avoid being lost financially, we have to see our money as God sees it. If we don't, then we're going to remain lost. We'll end up with more debt, more bills than we planned. We'll end up saving less money, and we'll wonder where it all went. And we'll end up wondering if we'll ever get ahead. And we'll always worry about our money. We will remain lost financially. Now, in our context, the opposite of lost is not found. In our context, it's realizing where you are and how to get where you want to be. That's why I challenged you last week to take the step of tracking your spending for a month, to just take 1 month and see where all the money is going. Because I imagine if you're like most people, you don't know where it goes. You only know when it's gone. So take some time and track where the money's going. And that will help you know what to do to get where you need to be. So here's the question that we're going to look at today. How does God view your money and your possessions? And I know some of you are going, well, he just wants it. He just wants it, right? And let me give you some good news. If God wanted it, he would take it. He's God. I mean, the government takes it, right? So God is much, much bigger than the government. And if he wanted it, he would have already taken it. So it's way bigger than that. In Luke 16, Jesus gets his gang together and he tells this story. And the purpose of this story that we'll find out in the end was to help his audience understand how God views not just our money, but our stuff, the stuff that we buy with our money. And he says if we would adopt his view of our stuff, it will be easier for us to make wise decisions when it comes to our finances and managing our finances. Now remember, I told you last week, I'm not asking anything from you. I want something for you. This is a series about wanting something for you, wanting you to be able to financially do what you want to do and have that freedom that comes with taking any arena of your life and totally surrendering it to God. So let's get into this parable and then we'll talk about it, all right? We're going to begin in verse 1. And Jesus told this story to his disciples. There was a certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs. And one day a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So the employer called him in and said, "What's this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you are going to be fired." The manager thought to himself, "Now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when I'm fired." So he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. He asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" And the man replied, "I owe him 800 gallons of olive oil." So the manager told him, "Take the bill and quickly change it to 400 gallons. "And how much do you owe my employer?" he asked the next man. "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. Here, the manager said, "Take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. And the rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. It is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your earthly possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. But if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? No one can serve two masters, for you will hate the one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And Jesus said the very same thing last week in a different passage. You can't serve both God and money. Can we just stop and pray and ask God to speak to us this morning about our perspective on our stuff? Father, would you just show us as we open up your word and as we talk about it? Would you just show us how you see things, how you see our stuff, our money, our possessions? And open our hearts to the fact that if you wanted it, you would have already taken it. But there's something more that you want us to do with it. So God, show us what that is today from your word. Help us to see our money as you see it. In your name I pray, amen. So I want to just go back through this and just talk about this. It's an interesting story. If you go back to verse 1, Jesus is telling this story, and he says there's this certain rich man who had a manager handling his affairs, and one day a report came that the manager was wasting his employer's money. So you have a rich guy here who has enough money and he hires someone else to look after his financial affairs while he goes off and plays golf or whatever he does. This guy was in charge. But he finds out that this guy who's been handling his stuff is doing a terrible job. So, in fact, he's wasting this rich man's money. So in verse 2, the employer calls him in and says, "What's this I hear about you? Get your report in order because you are going to be fired." And for some reason, when I read that passage, Donald Trump comes to my mind every time. I don't know why. But he's getting ready to fire this guy. But look at what he tells him. He says, "Get your report in order." In other words, I want you to go finish up any business dealings that you're currently involved in, wrap up all the loose ends, bring me the black notebooks, and then you're done. You'll no longer handle my affairs once you've wrapped up whatever you're in the middle of. So in verse 3, the manager, he thinks to himself. The manager thought to himself. Now, what's the next word there? Now. Now is a time word. Now. That's important for this parable. What am I going to do now? He says, now what? My boss has fired me. I don't have the strength to dig ditches, and I'm too proud to beg. I know how to ensure that I'll have plenty of friends who will give me a home when, another time word, I am fired. So this guy comes up with a plan. Here's what he does. He realizes, you know what? I have a little bit of time. I have a little bit of opportunity. So I need to leverage my time and my opportunity to secure for myself something in the future. Because when I lose my job, I don't want to beg. I don't want to do manual labor. I've got to have some place to go, some place to live. I'm going to need some friends to help me out. How can I use my time and my opportunity to secure my future? So he comes up with this plan. Verse 5, he invited each person who owed money to his employer to come and discuss the situation. And he asked the first one, "How much do you owe him?" And the man replied, "I owe him 800 gallons of oil." So the manager told him, "Take the bill and quickly, because I don't have much time, quickly change it to 400 gallons. What? Yeah, I'm going to let you off the hook for 50 cents on the dollar. You get me the 400 gallons, I'll consider your debt paid. So they signed the paperwork. Now let me ask you, if someone did that for you, wouldn't you be grateful? I mean, if you owed someone $500 and they said, "Look, just pay me $250 and we'll be square," wouldn't that make you pretty happy? Sure it would. And I'll bet that guy turned around while he was leaving and said, "Hey, thanks. Listen, if there's anything I can do for you, you let me know." "Oh, I will. Sooner than you think." And then in verse 7, the next guy, "How much do you owe my employer?" "I owe him 1,000 bushels of wheat," was the reply. Here the manager said, "Take the bill and change it to 800 bushels. "You're kidding." "No, give me 800 now, we'll call it even." And they close the deal, and that guy walks away and says, "Man, thanks. Listen, if there's anything I can do for you, let me know." "I will." So he goes to all the people who owed his boss anything and tells them it's bargain day. He's negotiating the deal of a lifetime. And he has the authority to do that because his boss said, "Go finish up whatever business you're dealing with." So he has a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity. And he's leveraging it for his own good. Now, the people who are standing around Jesus listening to this parable were probably thinking what some of us are thinking. Man, this is a really bad guy. I mean, that's just so dishonest. And he's ripping his boss off big time. He must be the bad guy, because when Jesus told the parable, you know, the people were thinking, okay, in this parable, someone's God, Someone's me, someone's the bad guy, someone's the good guy, the Samaritan, maybe whatever. And so they're thinking, who is who in this parable? And Jesus was such a master storyteller that the people were thinking that this guy was in big trouble. But when Jesus tells a parable, nothing goes like you would expect. In verse 8, he says, the rich man had to admire the dishonest rascal for being so shrewd. And the people were going, what? Yep, this guy was one shrewd dude. The rich man calls this guy in, pats him on the back, Jesus? Yeah. He says, I got to hand it to you. You had a little bit of time. You had a little bit of opportunity, and you made the best of it. I've got to admire that. And the people listening to Jesus are totally confused now. And they're like, Jesus, are you saying that we're supposed to be dishonest? Help me out here. And unlike most other times, Jesus does take the time to explain what this parable means. So in the middle of verse 8, we're out of the parable, and then Jesus says this, and it is true that the children of this world are more shrewd in dealing with the world around them than are the children of the light. Now this is huge. Jesus is looking at these religious people. These are people, most of them believe there's a heaven. Most of them believe there's an eternity. Most of them believe that this life is not all there is. And Jesus says, do you realize that the people of this world, the people that think that what you see is what you get, the people who think that there's nothing beyond what's here now, that they're more shrewd than those of you who actually believe there's a heaven? And those of you who actually believe that everybody lives forever somewhere, these children of the world are more shrewd than you are. Now, why is that, Jesus? Because they know how to take a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity and leverage it so that their time on earth, both present and future, is good time. They know how to leverage it. And he says, those of you who believe that people will spend eternity somewhere, those of you who believe that there's a heaven, you need to take a page out of his playbook. Do you see that spider going right down my thing here? Get away, dude. You need to take a page out of his playbook. You need to learn a lesson from the dishonest money manager. And Jesus goes on to explain, and he gives us 3 new lenses through which to view everything we have and everything we will ever own. Look at verse 9. Here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then, when your earthly possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. Now, Jesus is telling you how God views your stuff. And here's the first lens to look through. God sees our possessions as a tool. God sees our possessions as a tool. Our wealth, our possessions, our money, he sees it as a tool. And he says, you need to figure out a way to use your temporary worldly wealth in such a way that when you die and you enter into what's next, into eternity, into heaven, there will be people there that welcome you. Use your temporary wealth in such a way as to introduce them to the God who loves them, and you secured for them a place in eternity. I want you to use your temporary stuff in such a way that when you get to heaven, someone will walk up to you and say, hi, Bobby. I'm Josh. I'm here because of you. And I may go, I'm sorry, I've never met you. I don't remember you. He said, yeah, that's okay. But do you remember back when you had a pool party for all the students in the youth ministry at Creeksend, and you cooked burgers for us, and the dog got out, and we had to go chase the dog, and we got water all over your house, and do you remember that? Yeah, I kind of remember that. And he said, well, I was there. And not long after that, I accepted Christ. Now, that event actually did happen. I don't know if Josh was there or not. I don't know who Josh is. But it's my prayer that someday someone will come up to me and say, you remember that? I'm here because of you. And that's what Jesus is talking about. Someone who will come up to you and say, man, thanks for using your house. Thanks for opening up your pool and playing games with us and cooking for us. See, God sees your stuff, your possessions, as a tool. And Jesus teaches this throughout the Gospels. Use your temporary wealth because you've got a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity. Use it in such a way that God can use it to move people into his kingdom. And this way, your temporary stuff has eternal consequence. Now, some of you I know already get this principle. Our mission team just got back from a trip, and many of them used their own personal vehicles to go. Many of them paid their own way. Some of them used vacation time to go and minister to the children in South Texas. At least 2 kids came to know Christ in that trip that we know of. You see, they leveraged what they had, their vehicles, their vacation, their money, their temporary stuff, for an eternal consequence. That's what Jesus is talking about. And I know many of you do that. I mean, there are businessmen in our church who own businesses who use those businesses for the kingdom of God. They do things here at the church. They do things around the world for eternal consequences. You may open up your home to a group or a fellowship. You volunteer to drive kids around during Vacation Bible School or D-Now or something that we're having here. Or you give money so that a child can go to camp. Or you give money so that someone can go on a mission trip. I see it all the time. And it's something that we all need to grasp. That concept that he sees our stuff, our temporary worldly possessions, as a tool. And we're to leverage them for eternal consequences. See, we've been commanded in this passage not to accumulate and consume, and accumulate and consume. God sees our possessions as tools, and we're to leverage them with whatever little time and whatever little opportunity that we have for eternal purposes. And this may make you happy. He doesn't want you to give them away. He wants you to use them better. Put them into circulation for his kingdom. Well, that's the first lens, and he gives us another lens to look through in verse 10. He says, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you're not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? Now, wait a minute. That sounds like somebody is checking up on me to see how I'm using my stuff, to see if I'm trustworthy or not. And that's exactly right. It's a test. See, God sees our possessions as a test. It's a test to see if we are trustworthy. See, God puts us all in one category. I know that we look at wealth in different categories all over the world and here at home, but God puts us all in one category. We all have a little bit of something. We all have a little bit. Your little bit may be bigger or smaller than my little bit, but we all have a little bit. And we all have stuff that's temporary. And everybody's temporary stuff isn't even their own. They leave it here for someone else. We're just borrowing it while we're here. And what God is concerned with is not how much you have or not how long you're going to have it. What he is concerned with is what you're doing with it. And he's looking for trustworthy people. and this may blow your mind, but Jesus is saying God is watching the way you use your little bit of temporary stuff that's not even yours to begin with. And based on how you use your little bit of temporary stuff, it will determine how God honors you in the world to come. Did you see that he talks about true riches? That's eternal riches. And these riches are ours as opposed to being on loan here. So they're going to be a lot of bit there as opposed to a little bit here if I do what I'm supposed to do with it. And Jesus says you need to understand your stuff is a test. And I'm going to find out if you're really trustworthy or not. Because I know your stuff is where your heart is. And we talked about that last week, and we'll talk about it some more. Your stuff tells me where your heart is, and it tells me who is and who is not trustworthy to be blessed and rewarded in the life to come. Has nothing to do with who goes to heaven. It has everything to do with what you're given when you get there. Not only is everything you own a tool, it's also a test. And God is looking for faithful, trustworthy men and women. Now, one more verse, verse 13. Very much like we left off last week. No one can serve two masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. That's what Jesus said last week. Here's the final lens. Not only does God view our possessions as a test and as a tool, but he also sees our possessions as a trademark. Now, what's a trademark? A trademark is a brand, right? You see restaurants, titles, you see sayings that have that little circle with a TM there beside them, meaning that that is their brand. And when you see have it your way, who's the brand? Burger King, right? So it's a trademark. It's the way we handle our stuff, the way we manage our finances is an indicator as to who we really serve. And God says, you can't serve me and money at the same time. You're going to serve me or you're going to serve money, but you can't serve both. And we may look at that and we say, but I don't serve money, God. I love you and I serve you, not my money. To which God says, well, yeah, okay. Let me ask you something. When you're making a decision about a purchase, do you run it through the grid of wisdom? Because I've called you to wisdom. Do you do that before you make a purchase? You see, if you don't, then you're making an unwise decision and you're serving money and not me. And when you say things like, I don't want those kids over here messing up my house or spilling drinks in my car, I don't want a group of people in my family room, I don't want to give my hard-earned money to this or that cause, and I don't care if that thing sits in my garage or in a storage unit or in my attic, and I'll never use it, but I'm not going to liquidate it and give that money away. See, when you say things like that, God says, you see what I mean? You either serve me or you serve money. And the way you manage your stuff tells me who you are. It tells me your value system. It tells me what you prioritize. It's a trademark. It tells me who you really serve. Now imagine what it would look like if we viewed our financial world and our financial decisions through those three lenses: as a test, as a tool, and as a trademark. Do you think we would make different decisions? Can you imagine what would happen if we went home today at lunch and we sat down with our families and we had a conversation like this? Guys, how can we use our house for eternal consequences? How can I use my boat for eternal consequences? How about my lake house? How can I use my lake house for eternal consequences? How can I use this stuff that God has allowed me to borrow and use for a period of time? How can I use that for the sake of His kingdom? Can you see how different thinking about your finances would be? See, to avoid being lost financially, we're going to have to see our money as God sees it. And if you get a hold of this, here's what's going to happen. You're going to end up walking through your house or your garage or your attic or your storage unit, and you'll see a bunch of stuff that have been dusted and stored and kept clean but has no eternal value whatsoever. And you're going to think, man, I should just sell that and give it to eternal purposes. And at the most, at least use it for eternal purposes. See, it radically changes your perspective on things. Can you imagine how different your financial decisions would be if you knew that God was evaluating every single decision you made about your money? It's a test. Now, I know if you're thinking, if I do that, I'll never get a new car. If I do that, I'll never get the house I want. I mean, it's kind of scary. Well, let me just say this. If you're scared, it's because you've never been there. It's kind of like when my son Heath, when we first talked about girls. Now, every dad needs to talk to their sons about girls, right? Before they get interested in girls, right? So that's what we did. We sat down, and I started talking to him about girls, and he said, "Oh, Dad, kiss a girl? Yuck." And I'm sitting there smiling, thinking, that's because you haven't been on my side. Yeah, you think now that it's yuck, but I'm going to tell you, when you've been where I've been, then soccer and PlayStation are nothing like girls. See, if you're scared of this, it's because you've not been there. You've never looked at your possessions as tools, as tests, and as a trademark. But I know people who have. And I'll tell you this, they will say, once you've been there, once you've been on that side, you will never, ever want to go back to the other. Because they understand that their tools, their money, their wealth, everything they have can be used for eternal purposes. And they've made wise decisions because of that. And as a result, they've been able to go on a mission trip when they want to. They've been able to give for another kid to go to camp when they want to. They've been able to do things with their money because they look at their stuff through these lenses. And that's my challenge to you, to begin seeing this temporary stuff that you have, you get for a short time. How can you leverage it for eternity? Would you pray with me? Every head bowed, every eye closed for just a moment. This is just a serious time when we say, God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to respond? And my answer would be, are you willing to look at your stuff, your money, your possessions through these lenses as a tool to see others come to know Jesus? As a test, see how trustworthy you are so that when you get to your eternal home, the true riches will be there waiting for you. And so will the people who you invested in. Are you willing to make it a trademark so that when you make a decision, you can be trusted and it tells who you serve? Father, I pray today for every person within the sound of my voice. The Father, to realize that you could take their money if you wanted it, but that's not what you want. You want them to take what they have and use it for your kingdom. So would you teach us how to do that? Teach us what we need to do, and some of us may need to go walk to our homes and our garages and our storage units and make decisions based on that. But for some of us, it just means taking what we have and using it for you. Whatever it is, Father, would you show us what to do? Thank you again for your words today. You want the best for us, that's all. I ask this in Jesus' name.